I'm Roger Hallam. I helped to found Extinction Rebellion last January. I did a paper about creating a rebellion around a climate and ecological catastrophe, and I've been helping to design what happened last November, and in particular the rebellion episode, as you might call it, of April the 15th. So I did a video before April the 15th to say this is why it will or should work, and it did, so that was a relief. And so I'm not out of a job yet. And so this video is going to be a bit of a sequel, but it's going to be like a little bit more involved, which is why did it work and how people watching this video can sort of recreate it in the UK or potentially in other countries. So my background, in case people don't know, is I've been an organic farmer for 20 years. Like climate change sort of destroyed my business. I've spent the last 5 years studying at King's College on how to create radical political change. Been working with other researchers and activists for the last 2 or 3 years on how to create an effective rebellion, as you might say. Okay, so yeah. So my summary is direct action works. Direct action is what's going to bring about radical change in a short amount of time. Okay, and that basically means disruption, causing a fuss, sacrifice, getting arrested and what have you, and respect, being nice to people. That's the thesis. That's what I'm going to be talking about. The other thing I want to say is I'm just making this video from a sort of social scientific point of view, which means like there's no pressure. I'm not saying people should do it. I'm not going to be talking about the morality of it. I'm not saying like you should do this or you should do that or what people should do in other countries. I'm just saying like if you do this, this is likely to work. So that's my disclaimer. Don't sue me if you follow some of the ideas in this video and it doesn't work. I'm just like saying how I sort of see it on the basis of my experience, my research and other people's research. Now obviously it's mainly me rambling on, so obviously at some point Extinction Rebellion will be getting other people and doing something a little bit more official, but it's like 10 days since the end of the rebellion or something, and I'm just like going, okay guys, here's some ideas, on the basis of my opinion. So obviously it's just my view, it's not the official XR view, but obviously a lot of people in XR will probably broadly agree with what I'm about to say. But don't get the idea it's official. Like XR doesn't really do official things anyway. So it's just like, here it is. And if you don't like the video, that's fine, you don't need to watch it. Go and do something else. Okay, so it's gonna be quite long, right? So my argument is, we've got this like massive problem with climate catastrophe, ecological collapse. So what we need to do is get smart and organized on how to actually bring about radical social change quickly. So I'm not going to be able to say that to you in like 10-minute clip. So you're just going to have to put up with an hour or so of me rambling on, okay? And obviously, if you don't like that, that's fine. But I'm sort of aiming this video at those few thousand people out there that are actually serious about dedicating their life to this massive project to save humanity. So my calculation is that that's probably worth an hour of your time. So obviously, I'm going to give you a few leads about what to do afterwards. But I'm trying to go through like the fundamental things which make extinction work, as opposed to what's come before. That's going to be my argument. This doesn't work, this does, and this is why it worked. And I'm going to look at the 15th of April rebellion as a sort of case study, because everyone's talking about it and going, oh, that's amazing, we've got a meeting with Gove and, it was in the media and 1,000 people were arrested, wow. So the real question for like what you might call serious, rebels around the world is, so how did this work? How was it that it worked? And that's what we're going to look at in this video. So obviously, as I said, it's not the final word, you know, other people have different viewpoints on it, but I'm hoping to nail some of the key elements of it. And those principles can then be used in your own context, in another country, or, you know, in the UK, wherever, and you can apply them. And hopefully that's going to make you more effective. All right, so this is the next section. So I'm going to introduce you to a few sort of theoretical ideas, because a lot of people think you just go out and do stuff, but the act of going out and doing stuff always implies some theoretical assumptions, and they can either make you more or less effective. So arguably, these are some of the things where we need to start looking at social reality in a different way, and these enable you to basically understand better the things that are specific things I'm going to talk about. So this isn't going to be a big theoretical, you know, ramble. But on the other hand, theory is important. So I'm just going to go sort of briefly through a few things, and then we're going to talk about them a little bit more as we go through the talk. So the first idea is complexity. So this is, you know, just a posh word for saying that things are quite complex and complicated. And that means that you can't really predict things. So anyone, you know, comes along and says, oh, non-violence doesn't work, or, you know, going to city centres doesn't work. They've got the wrong model. They've got what you might call a mechanistic model. This assumption that you can actually work out the future in the same way as you can work out a car engine or something. Like, social reality isn't like that. It's so complex that you can't make exact predictions. But what you can do is what's called probe the system. So you can put something out and you get data back, and that gives you a sort of probability analysis. Do you know what I mean? You think, yeah, if we do that, it's likely to work, but you never quite know because it's too complicated. So that sort of makes us all a little bit more humble. So, you know, if you're looking at this video and you're going, oh, that's rubbish. Well, that's mechanistic thinking. You know, it might well be rubbish, but we don't really know. And one of the things that comes out of this is the idea of trying things. You know, let's try that. Okay, it probably won't work, but if it does, that's going to give us interesting data. So it produces a more openness and less dogmatic sort of, you know, old style 20th century political dogma. You know, this is the way, that's not the way. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is probing social reality to see what works and what have you. Okay, so that's sort of connected with this other idea of empiricism. So that's basically the idea of observation. So again, traditionally in radical politics, people go, you know, they've read the books and they've decided that works and that doesn't work, or we should do that, or we shouldn't do that, or those people are good and those people are bad. And it's mainly because they've read all these books which have been written by these guys like 30 years ago. Well, my proposition is, you know, maybe, but maybe not. You know, let's actually look at the situation. So for instance, like with the police, you might say, the police are like this, you know, as if it's a static thing. Well, it's not really, because there's the police and then there's the police, if you know what I mean. Sometimes they're like this and sometimes they're like that. So, you know, it depends on the social context. So the idea here is that, is to go out and observe. You know, let's try this. It's connected with the complexity idea. Let's go out, probe the system, get some data and have a look at it, and maybe something pops up, you know, which you never thought of, because, you know, we've just been reading books instead of trying things. And that's connected with this idea of sort of design engineering, as it were, which is, okay, so we try something and then, you know, it's sort of okay, but not that great. And then you tweak it, you know, do it a little bit of a different way, and then you do it again. And this is a process. So instead of just going, you know, sitting in a room and going, we're going to design a rebellion, it's going to be like this. It's like, no. What we're going to do is we've got an idea, we're going to go out and try it, and then, you know, during it, we might tweak it a little bit, or we'll do it again and change it around. Yeah, another idea is that there's a traditional idea of politics, which is there's this political realm, you know, where people do things because of their self-interest, you know, they're sort of selfish or whatever, and they do it, they analyse things, and it's all very reductive and mechanistic and not connected with the rest of society. So for instance, politics is this and politics isn't that, right? Or that's just social stuff and this is politics, right? So one of the big ideas here is it's actually all mixed up. if you see what I mean. So one example is, why do people go to campaign meetings? Well, it's because they're concerned about climate change. Well, not really. They mainly go to campaign meetings because they might be sad and lonely, you know, either consciously or unconsciously. So they're actually looking for people to be nice to them. So that's like a social thing, but it's in this political sphere. So it's a little bit more complicated, if you see what I mean. So a big idea of design in terms of how to create radical mobilisation is not to just look at the politics, but look at human needs and the humanity of social interaction. You know, what do people want, and why do they like to have biscuits? You might think, you know, you don't really see that in a political text, you know. So this is a new idea of sort of bringing the human and the social and the personal and the interpersonal into the political. And that gives us a depth of analysis. You know, we're actually looking at a wider field. And then another idea is the idea of balancing rather than sort of binary differences. So here, like again, like the traditional idea is that's wrong, that's right, you know. Well, it doesn't sort of make a lot of sense. You know, in a lot of discussions, when you get like serious, like political design, what you're doing all the time is balancing. There's this logic and there's this logic, and everyone knows that people have these logics, you know, this is this because of this is because of this, and they're convinced they're right, and they are right. The problem is that they're just in this little bubble of a particular logic. And there's actually another logic which is completely outside that bubble, which is true as well. So the name of the game is not to sort of choose that logic or over that logic. It's more like, okay, so how do we combine these together so that we get an optimal situation? And that enables to integrate them. And this is one of the fantastic things which we've seen in Extinction Rebellion over the last, 2 or 3 months, is this notion of collective intelligence. You know, quite often, because I'm often thinking, right, go into a meeting and go, this is the way to do it, and then suddenly someone comes up with, a really valid problem with it. And then someone else does, and suddenly you get all these different people with their different perspectives coming together, and you get this co-creation of something that's really amazing. And afterwards, you have to, it's a bit of a blow to your ego, but you have to sort of accept that, maybe my idea, it was half right? But it wasn't the thing, So this is the idea of balancing, and a lot of sort of practical social thinking over the last 100 years has all been about this idea. And of course, it's not a very radical idea. People love to be radical or reactionary. The notion of balancing is a bit boring. But in the nitty-gritty, as it were, of social struggle, that's what you're doing. You think, should we do this or do that? Well, maybe we'll do something in the middle. Okay, so all those are connected with, you can sort of see they're sort of connected. They're a new way of thinking about radical action design, as you might say. Then there's another sort of separate big thing, which is this notion, the idea that we're in a climate emergency. Now, one of the biggest problems, a lot of people will be watching this video, quite political, what have you, and one of the biggest problems is a lot of what's written about how to change the world assumes that one issue is the same as another issue. It's like, we've got this idea of how to get your message across, which is quite a postmodernist concept. In postmodernist, by that I mean sort of like, it doesn't really matter what the message, it doesn't matter whether it's true, it doesn't matter, whether actually people agree with it. Which can be true a lot of the time, if you're trying to sell jeans, it doesn't matter whether it's one sort of jeans or another sort of jeans, right? So that's true in that sort of context. But it's not true when it comes to climate change and the ecological collapse. So there's 3 things which I think make it sort of metaphysically stand out from everything else. And it's a trinity of horror, basically. First of all, it's universal. It is fundamentally going to affect everyone. I mean, we all know that it's going to affect the poor and, people of colour and what have you first. But fundamentally, if we're all going to die, we're all going to die. So it's universalist. The second thing is it's existential. We are going to all die as a human race unless we sort this out. And the third thing is it's exponential, which means it's getting worse. And it's not just getting worse, it's getting worse at an increasing rate. So it's like, it's off the scale bad because you've got all 3 things. It's everyone, we're all going to die, and it's getting worse. So that we need to keep that in the frame, right? So this means that how we need to act needs to be fundamentally grounded in what actually the deal is. This isn't, a penny on income tax, right? It's not trying to get people to wear red hats. This is like a major thing. And as we come through to explain why we've been successful, a fundamental reason why we've been successful is because it's fucking scary, and loads of people are just shitting themselves about it. So it's not really much to do with us at all. It's just because we've just like opened up the floodgates, as you might say. So we need to sort of bear that in mind. So those are some of the key sort of ideas that we're going to look through. So what I'm going to do now is just go fairly briefly through the basic theory of non-violence, and particularly the civil resistance model. So I've covered this in the video, on April the 15th, before April the 15th happened, but I'm just going to like rehash it so that we sort of know what the theory is, and then we're going to go through April the 15th and that week and see how that panned out and why it worked, and we followed the theory, so hopefully it sort of did. So the fundamental element here, elements of non-violence, we've sort of narrowed it down. It's slightly simplistic, but there's 3 elements. There's disruption. So disruption basically means like disturbing the society that you're in some way. And the reason for that is that's what gets attention, and it creates drama and what have you. Okay, so this isn't going on an A to B march or what have you. This is like sitting the road, at least in the UK. Now, incidentally, we are going to like talk about what it might be in other countries because it might change, but we'll deal with that later. Okay, so the second element is sacrifice. So that's a bit of a tricky word, but at the end of the day, what it means is, you have to like get arrested. Something has to happen which is going to affect your liberty or your material interests. And the reason that's effective is that people take notice of you because you're walking your talk. So you've got those thousands of arrests, over the last fortnight. And it's like, oh my God, these people are serious. Okay. And then the third element is respect. So this is interesting because it's not just an ethical principle. You can look at it as an ethical thing. Obviously it's nice to be nice to people, but there's also quite a strategic thinking behind it, which is that if you show respect, it shows a certain inner strength. It's a bit like, we're strong, we're doing this, we're going to get arrested, and we're going to be nice about it because we're confident in our views. We don't need to like start lashing out. And also, to the extent you do that, then you enable the opposition, as you might say, to save face. They're more likely to come over to your viewpoint. If you're giving them a hard time, then they're more likely to go, well, yeah, you sacrifice yourself, but you're being horrible to me, and I don't like you because you don't like me. So those are the sort of 3 key elements. Now, then we've got this specific sort of application, right? So you can do classical civil disobedience using those 3 elements in lots of different contexts. It could be a labour strike, it could be a hunger strike, it could be, it could be some sort of demonstration. There's a whole load of different things. But arguably, like, the most effective model is the civil resistance model, as we're calling it. So this has been replicated many times. So it's actually come up quite recently, like in Sudan, and before that in Algeria, and I think a year ago in Armenia. And this is this idea of lots of people going to the capital city. So there's several different elements here. So the first element is lots of people. You need to have lots of people, well, not loads. So we're looking at, 10 or 20,000. Enough people to basically sustain mass civil disobedience. Ideally more, but you don't need 200,000. You just need in the tens of thousands. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is this notion of the capital city. So the capital city is important because that's where the elites are, that's where the media are. So this has been a big change. One of the reasons we've been successful is you're there in the centre of London. Okay, you have to break the law. So this is the crossing the Rubicon thing, is crossing the law creates the drama. If you're just sitting there, doing a vigil or whatever, that's fine, but that's not really what's going to get the press and the publicity and the eyeballs and the nation looking at you. Breaking the law does. Has to be non-violent, right? So we're not going to deal with that much. We're going to assume that everyone's sort of broadly into the notion that non-violence works. And the reason it works is it makes it easy for people to actually enter into that political space. You know, if you just have to sit in the road, you can be 84 or you can be 10, right? If you're going to be throwing stones, then that's a different kettle of fish. Okay, then it has to go on day after day. So this is a new innovation. You can't just do it for the one day. It has to go on day after day, ideally 2 to 3 weeks. Definitely over a week. And the third thing, the last thing, is it has to be fun, or it has to be cultural. There has to be stuff going on that, you know, workshops, you know, music, what have you. All right, so on the 15th of April, off we went. So this was our little guidebook, those principles. So what I want to do is look at April the 15th as a little bit of a case study and see what happened and why it worked, and go into a little bit more depth. And there's a few new things that I want to introduce, you know, that I think worked, and a little bit things that I sort of learnt from it anyway. And so I'm going to go through a few key aspects of what happened on April the 15th and the run up to it, which I think are sort of controversial, as you might say. They sort of deviate from what you might call conventional wisdom in terms of organising a rebellion or organising mass civil disobedience. But they're things which I think actually led to its success. You know, that's my argument anyway. So they're things for people to consider. Now, if you don't do these things, it doesn't mean you're not going to be successful, but, you know, you're going to be less likely to be. And of course, if you do all these things, it doesn't mean you're definitely going to be successful either, right? This is a complexity situation. You know, you never can quite predict. It's a probability thing. So these things I'm going to go through are like the things that maximize the probabilities. So the first thing is about organization. So there's a big debate about like top-down, you know, command and control organization, you know, the archetype being sort of Leninist organisation, you know, central committee decides what to do, everyone runs around doing what they're supposed to do. And then we have like the other sort of dogma, which is horizontalism, which is, you know, everyone can do what they want and everyone communicates horizontally and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now, the practical issue here is not sort of the ideology between those things. The practical thing is to like combine elements of both so that you have things are organised, but you also have people feeling autonomous. So in Extinction Rebellion, you have this general notion of holacracy, which is a bit of a problem word actually, because no one really quite knows what it means, and some people think it means this thing, but the general idea, the bottom line, is that people are semi-autonomous. So again, we're getting back to this concept of balancing. So usually, you know, when you have these two logics, again, the issue is to integrate them, not to sort of go, we're going to vote that one or that one. It's like, okay, so that's got things going for it. That's got things going for it. So what that meant was we had loads of working groups, you know, to sort out the toilets, to sort out, you know, the action elements, to sort out the press, to sort out social media. So these are all different groups. And then they're in circles. So there's lots of different groups together. One representative from each of those groups goes to a circle meeting, where an anchor meeting, and they tell each other what they're about to do, so that they can coordinate. But the important thing to realise is those groups are broadly working by themselves. They just take advice at the end of the day. So sometimes it goes a bit pear-shaped, but it enables loads of people to sort of buy into the process. So that enables like a high-level organisation with a lot of people participating. And a lot of people have said, oh, you know, this is really organised. How did that happen? And that's basically how it happened, is not to have 2 or 3 people trying to think about everything, and you don't have loads of groups just going, oh, you know, we're just doing our own thing. So that's the first thing. So the second thing is openness. Now, openness is big arguments about openness. And, you know, again, you know, there's pros and cons, you know, it's a big debate. You know, should you have a sort of secret rebellion? You know, that's a sort of classic, you know, one day all these people appear on the streets. You know, or do you have it all open and then everyone arrests you before you can get anywhere? So you can see there's, you know, there's pros and cons. So obviously, like, what you could or should do, you know, to a certain extent depends on the context. But the general principle and the general bias of success, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of rebellion design, is an openness bias. if and when possible, you're open. And the primary reason for this is loads of people know about it. There's a really big problem with having secretive mass action, which is, how do people know? It's really straightforward in a way. You know, like, there's a rebellion, yeah, but no, we can't tell anyone. I mean, it doesn't really work. Do you see what I mean? Having said that, then obviously some elements of it need to be kept under wraps. Like, you can't say exactly, you know, what you're going to do, where you're going to glue onto a, you know, the Home Office or something. You're not going to tell everyone that. So, you know, operational details can tend to be, but the broad narrative has got to be open. So we had this big debate, you know, we had these 4 sites. Are we going to tell everyone beforehand? Well, I had the same debate about the bridges last year. You know, should we tell everyone about the bridges? And one argument was, no, we can't tell everyone about the bridges because the police will stop us getting on. But then we sussed out the police aren't actually going to do that because it's going to be too messy for them. And so we were right. You know, we were able to get onto the bridges. And the irony, of course, was that having made it open, it was a lot less likely that they could stop you because thousands of people were coming. And once thousands of people do something, it's just physically impossible for, you know, in a British context, for the police to stop that from happening. So we made the right call there. We made it public. We said, we're going to Marble Arch, we're going to, you know, going to the bridge, we're going to Parliament Square. Everyone knew about it. The press knew about it. An international press knew about it. The movement knew about it. The police knew about it. And surprise, surprise, the police made, you know, discalculation. There was no point trying to stop all this from happening. And they even like blocked off the roads. So yes, phew, that worked. Okay. So the third element of it is ambition, right? So again, a lot of like social movements, particularly that have had an experience of defeat, like social movements in the Western world, you know, it's like, oh, we can't do that, you know, people won't turn up, oh, you know, it's too extreme, we need to go step by step. No. What we need to do is to think of something ambitious and then times it by 5, you know? And then we're in the ballpark of actually doing something that's really impressive, like, you know, it's fortune favours the brave sort of argument. And the other element of that, of course, is we're all shitting ourselves because we haven't got any time anyway, because we've got an exponential, you know, worsting threat. So it's not like, hey, we can have a rebellion, you know, next year once we've got ourselves sorted out. No. Like, we've got to get on with it because, you know, the next generation is in the balance. So it's going to be a little bit messy. So, you know, again, we had this big debate, you know, oh, should we just go for one, you know, one site? And then we're discussing going, just fuck it, let's just go for the 4. And, you know, I was panicking before. I was thinking, oh, God, you know, only 200 people are going to turn up. And, you know, it's going to be like, oh, right, okay, 50 people a bridge. So, but, you know, that was the right call, right? So this is really important, you know, talking to other countries. You know, I talk to people in other countries and they go, oh, there's not many of us. And, oh, you know, the police weren't allowed to do it. And, oh, you know, it's like, just do it. Right? I mean, obviously you don't want to be totally reckless, but you want to be ambitious for the reasons I've just said. So I want to say a little bit about the police response, because this is a big area. You know, why did the police let it happen? Well, the short answer is you don't really know. So all those people out there that are going, well, the police let it happen because of this theory or that theory. Well, the problem with theories is, like, where's the evidence? So what we do sort of know is sort of, if we take the police's view at face value, is, you know, they made a statement, which is people have a right to peaceful protest, where, you know, sometimes it's worthwhile taking things at face value, you know, not getting too analytical. You know, they believe that people have a right to go and blockade a roundabout, you know, because it's a peaceful protest. And the critical thing here is peaceful. Right? If it was going to be violent, that would be a different kettle of fish. I'd know for a fact that they'd be in with the riot police. So I think the critical causal fact here is non-violent discipline, which comes back to our theory, right? It's got to stay non-violent. So what we've done all the time is non-violent, right? To the public, to the press, to the movement, to the police. You know, and we've just done it over and over again for a year. So when Extinction Rebellion goes to see the police, and we say it's going to be non-violent, they know it's going to be non-violent because we're a disciplined movement. Now that relationship has to be built up to a certain extent, you know, because obviously in different parts of the world or whatever, that's going to be more mistrustful. But the fact of the matter is it's not impossible. You know, it might be difficult. So you know, I will speculate on two things, you know, on this is in the Western world, and I think this doesn't just apply to the UK, the state has been hollowed out through neoliberal austerity measures. So the police don't actually have that many resources. You know, we don't have big police states. You know, we've got evidence that there's supposed to be like 30 police officers on you know, in an area of London, and there's actually usually 10. So the police have told me. So the whole thing is like completely stretched. So if you're a police chief and you're looking at Extinction Rebellion, then obviously a big part of your calculation is how can I police this effectively with limited resources? And the answer to that is let it happen and then start clearing it. So you can sort of see a logic there. And of course the bit, you know, we can speculate that the police are pissed off anyway, so they're sort of like half supporters, but you know, who knows? So what you can see here is in the British or London context, this sort of works, right? And we'll come on to sort of what the broad principle is behind it, because a lot of people in other countries or, you know, on the left in Britain might say, well, yeah, it's just because you're white and middle class. Well, that's sort of maybe half true, right? Again, you know, it's a balancing thing. It's not like, well, it was obvious because of this. Yeah, that was a factor, but we need to have, you know, if you're going to be successful at radical political change, we need sophisticated analysis. We don't just want, you know, dogmatic assertions, you know. We don't want to be told the police is the state and the state is the police. I mean, that's just a religious assertion. You know, it has no empirical sophistication. You know, sometimes the police are similar to the state and sometimes they're not. You know, there's plenty of evidence of police like, you know, saying we're not actually going to police this rebellion anymore. I want to say a little bit more about this, which is a bit of a radical thesis, but I actually think it's got a lot going for it. And this is the notion that respect trumps political interest, you know, which is controversial because we've had 30 years, particularly in left-wing thinking, of thinking the bad guys are bad and they're bad sort of thing, and we're the good guys, and there's no point in being nice to the bad guys because they're just bad. Now, you know, this may well be true, but there's a lot of evidence now that shows that if you're respectful towards the opposition, then that can trump what you might call their material interest to be bad. And this works on a number of different levels. I mean, you can do it officially by just saying, look, we're a non-violent movement. So then structurally, they know they're going to deal with you in a non-violent way. But there's also, I don't think we should underestimate the human, the subversive influence of human contact. So again, like, you know, as we said in the beginning with this theory of the political's there and the social's there, like, no, it's not, right? You know, once you're talking to a police officer, you know, at the beginning, it's like, you're the bad guys, we're the good guys. But after about 10 minutes, you're talking about, you know, where your kids go to school and stuff. You're basically having a human conversation. Now, that, for me, that is not insignificant. It's not politically insignificant, because what's happening there is you're starting to create connectivity, social connectivity. And the same thing happens when we go and see the police. You know, we're not going in going, you know, you bastards, you know, you should be changing. We're just going, this is us, you know, and we're going to treat you with respect. And yes, we're going to go and break the law, and you're going to stop us. And we're, you know, they don't give us a hard time, we don't give. So you're starting to create a relationship, and that relationship then starts to create trust. Now, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, we're getting appropriated by the police. Well, maybe, maybe not. But what isn't, you know, it's not obvious that we're not appropriating the police. Like, it's a two-way street. And there's plenty of evidence, you know, from other social struggles that, you know, the peasants go and talk to the soldiers, you know, Russian Revolution, and then soldiers go, oh, all right, okay, I'm putting my, you know, I'm in with these people. So that happens quite a lot. So there's a good argument. I'm not saying it's airtight, but it's not obvious that there's not a good argument, let's put it like that, for actually going to talk to the police at every opportunity. You know, with the provisos that you're not talking about other people, that, you know, you're not sort of going to get persuaded not to be radical or whatever, you know, and you're not talking about, you know, tactical secrets, as you might say, you know, what you're going to do tomorrow. But it's not beyond the realm of a disciplined movement to be able to go and talk to the security forces about the weather And as I said, like the reductive political world thinks, what's the point of talking to the weather about the police? Well, my argument would be this is actually deeply political because people are starting. So I think like that's the background, and a lot of people going, why did they allow it to happen? Well, my argument is, and I can't really prove it, so maybe I'm wrong, but my feeling, having dealt with the police for 2 years, is they start to feel like they're not actually going to be aggressive towards you because they sort of know the lay of the land. So who knows, Okay, so now I'm going to get on to like the heart of why it was successful. And I mean, we've just talked about, disruption, sacrifice, respect and what have you, and the civil resistance model. But all that is informed by this big notion of a dilemma action. So this is the heart of nonviolence. And for a while, it's difficult to people to get it. And then suddenly the penny drops. And so I'll try and develop it in quite an involved way. But the idea of breaking the law is that it puts the opposition into a dilemma. And that dilemma is that they can let you get on with it or they can repress you. So I spoke about this, I think, before, and it worked perfectly in this situation because what we'd done previously was we'd done things and it just let us get on with it. So we had to design something where it wasn't so full on that they were going to come and beat everyone up, but it wasn't so fluffy, as it were, that it just let you do it. And we succeeded, as you know, because we got them in that sweet spot where they weren't going to come and be really like violent towards us, but they were forced to take action because we were blocking these 4 roundabouts, right? If we've only blocked one, they'd probably left us there all week, right? If we'd gone and sort of started smashing all the windows of the Home Office, they'd have sent the riot police in. Do you see what I mean? So between those two extremes, I'm not saying either was right or wrong, but you can see between those two extremes is what you call a dilemma action sweet spot, which is why hopefully this video is going to be called We've Already Won, which is once you've got into that sweet spot, it's like checkmate. Whatever they do, you've won. And you can see that during the week, all the media's there going, oh my God, there's people in Oxford Circus again, they haven't been moved off. And it's like, you just get loads of publicity. It's a pink boat. I mean, what the hell, like what's going on, where's the police? So that's great. You've got all this publicity, these weird people, they've taken over London. How audacious, how different, how interesting, how brave, courageous. This is a new world, they're taking over public space. No one's done that before. Oh my God, dum, 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 dum. So that's good. So what's the other alternative? Start arresting you. Fine, start arresting, day one, 200 arrests, I was thinking, oh my God, that's it, they're going to clear us all. But like everyone starts going to the different places. And, by day 2, we've got 400 arrests or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, there's all these arrests happening. Day 3, there's 600 arrests, 800 arrests, 1,000 arrests. As I said in my previous video, once you get to 1,000 arrests, you're in the ballpark of a major political event. My prediction was correct. You don't need like 10,000, 50, whatever. But somewhere around 1,000, that's more arrests technically than any other civil disobedience campaign in British history. It sounds a bit grand, but it's in that ballpark, right? So that has a massive plus. So you can see whatever they do, we've already won. And this is like the amazing thing that enables that penny to drop, which is you can design a non-violence campaign where you've already won as soon as the ink's dried. So that makes everything, you can relax because whatever happens, you're going to get a win. And that's like very different to the sort of paranoid, defensive, stressy sort of political confrontation approach, which is we've got to get to this and they could remove us from Oxford Circus and then we've lost. So it's like this idea that we've already won is a central It's a central revelation yet. The old style idea is we've got to hold the space. If we lose the space, we've lost, and it's a defeat, right? Stressy, defensive, paranoid, failure, depression, all these things that social movements get into, or political forces. It's very much old style, 19th century, win-lose, male sort of, angry sort of thing. The beauty of non-violence is that once you've designed it right, you can go on holiday and relax. I could just go off because I knew it would work fundamentally. I mean, not exactly because it's a complex system, but we're in the ballpark. So I want to the penny drops when you realise that arrests is good. But I want to be specific about what I mean by that. I don't mean arrests are good in the sense that, there's some intrinsic value to getting arrested. It's like a lot of people say we fetishize arrest. It's not like we're saying arrest is some sort of elevated spiritual state or something. We're simply saying, from an analytical point of view, that if you get a lot of rest, you're going to have a political effect, right? You can fetishize anything and say demonstrations are great or not, but, the question is, do demonstrations work or not? That's that question. And the simple answer to arrest is, other things being equal, as a general principle, arrests basically create political change. That's all we're saying, right? I mean, some people love to be arrested, some people don't. That's not really the issue here. The issue is, in the context of a dilemma action, where if they leave you be on the streets, you've won, and then they arrest you, you've won. So that's when the penny drops. And I'll just take a little digression here, if you look at the great, dilemma action designers of the past, like Martin Luther King, for instance, this is the heart of non-violence design, is they're trying to find somewhere where the stakes are really high, not so high that everyone's going to get shot or something, but high enough to basically dramatize this dilemma for the authorities. So in the film Selma, they do this campaign, people may have seen it. Martin Luther King goes into Selma and he goes into the hotel, and it's a segregation or what have you, and the owner comes along and he's going to shake his hands, and he approaches Martin Luther King and goes, hits him in the face, and he's knocked to the floor. Right? So the old style thinking is, this is outrageous, this is racism, this is bad, we've been defeated, we need to get revenge, bum. And then Martin Luther King walks out and he says, this is perfect, this place is perfect. So he's you see what I mean? He made that transition to a sort of non-violent campaign orientation, it's a professional orientation. It's a bit like being a counsellor and, someone suddenly breaks down. Well, if you're not trained, you think, oh, terrible, the person's broken down, poor person. But if you're a professional counsellor, oh, great, because that's going to facilitate, the psychological change, if you see what I mean. So, what Martin Luther King was basically saying is, this is a place where we're going to have drama. The opposition is stupid enough to go and hit people, But he's being analytical, He's not making a moral point. If you may decide hitting people is a bad idea, well, that's up to you. All he's basically saying is, this is going to facilitate political change because, it's tricky enough. And the same thing in London is, when those people were being arrested, I was going, great, there's some arrest. But I'm not going great to some arrest because I'm being horrible to these poor people that are getting arrested. I'm simply analysing the situation and making the deduction, as it were, that those arrests are going to lead to political change. So, that's the argument, and that's basically the essence of this video in a way, is, that's why we worked. 1,000 arrests in a week, the media was there. It was just I think everyone felt it was just like an accumulation of drama, wasn't it? It was oh my goodness, there's another 200, oh my goodness, there's another 200 arrests. It's this is massive, no, this hasn't happened before, and you can see the police weren't in control. They were forced. We got them into this sweet spot where they were forced to arrest people, because we all know they hate arresting people. We've got all this data, blood of our children, what have you, they just let it happen. But what we've established is there's this criticality point where basically the police chief is going to go, it's politically impossible for me to, you can't leave all these people in the streets of London. So that's tick, we got to the sweet spot. Fantastic. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit more detail about how the dynamics of commitment work. So a lot of people have this like wrong idea in my, scholarly view that, you talk to people and then they radicalize and then they go and do action. So yeah, you talk to people, then they radicalize and then they go and do action. Obviously that's got a grain of truth, but that's not really how it happens. What happens is people act and then they radicalize. So it's what I call embodiment. So what happened, I think, on the streets of London during those 10 days was something very sort of almost magical in a way. But there's a good social scientific sort of reasons for what happened, which was people entered that space and then people got arrested. And the act of getting arrested made them more likely to get arrested again, because it's like you've got arrested, your body's got arrested, and your body sort of tells your mind it's sort of okay. It's a bit of an anticlimax in a way. You think, oh my goodness, I'm going to get arrested. And at the end of the day, you're just going in a room and, there's a bed and it's locked. And then you come out and you think, well, that wasn't such a big deal. I'm going to do it again. Or you might even feel like quite ecstatic because you think, I was really, it's like anything. Everyone's got this experience. Something's really fearful and then you do it and you feel really good afterwards because it's like you suddenly achieved something. So you get that sort of high and then you go back. So that's what I call embodiment. This isn't some academic exercise. Should one get arrested or not? Right? It's like, yes, someone has. And then they realize this sort of get empowered through their body doing it. So that's like counterintuitive, but that's like a main thing. So what you want to design, if you want to design rebellion, you want to design in this sort of embodied action. We're not doing a silent vigil. We're not just handing out leaflets. We're putting our bodies in the road. We're not just putting our bodies in the road because, it makes sense. We're putting our bodies in a row because then our bodies will tell our minds that we can act in a radical way. So there's another element to this, which is what I'm calling community, which is you're not just a bod in some sort of, individualistic universe. You're sitting there with other people. They're getting arrested as well. You're in the waiting room in the police station, you're sharing jokes, you're talking to the police guys, you're in there, you're in the cell, you let out, someone's got some nice food for you when you walk out the door, people hugging each other, you've got that sort of adrenaline, you've got that sudden emotional connectivity with people that you haven't met, you only known them for 2 days, and then you're going out and getting arrested again, and it's like, this creates a massive bond, and this is, it's ecstatic. There's no other word for it. It's like suddenly you're with people and you love them. You're caring for them. And this is what drama does. You're just sitting there watching telly with people. It's not really going to make who cares, right? But if you're out on the road and some police people are dragging you off and then they drag someone off next to you, you feel that immediate solidarity or empathy. So this is another thing that consolidates commitment. Okay. And then there's a third element. These are all interconnected, The third element is territoriality. So that's a nice posh word, isn't it? So that basically means like human beings, I know it sounds a little bit sort of reductive and what have you, but the fact of the matter is we like to defend our space, And you can see that so viscerally during that week. It was like people turned up to Oxford Circus, never really been there in their lives. 2 days later, it's like, we're staying here. Do you see what I mean? This is our space, And there's experiments in social science where this sort of thing happens, give people a space and it's like, and it is evolutionary, you see it in animal behavior, right? You have your area. So this develops, again, what people underestimate is how quickly this develops. You've got this radicalization of commitment, and these three elements, of course, all combine to be, the sum is greater than, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think this explains why we had 1,000 arrests, because if we didn't have this, people were probably going, "Hey, I've got arrested and I'm going to go back to work tomorrow." But you didn't see that. There's 1,000 conversations where people go, "I'm not going. I'm going to stay now," because of territoriality. This is my space. Community, I really like these people, you know, they support me. You know, arrest, it's not such a big deal, you know, it's actually like my way of being myself, you know, and actually making that statement and, you know, all that sort of thing. So the design here, as you can see, is not some cerebral process. It's not like having meetings and people individually go and get arrested, right? What we're creating here is what you might call compounding effects. And that's the genius of the design, yeah? A short occupation. And you can see like occupations have a long history of success. And that's not because of some, hey, we're just occupying the space. It's because of the territorialities, the community building. It's the experience of repression. And all these things, you know, create a sort of backfiring effect in a way. The more the state tries to repress it, the more people come in. So this is the essence of the civil resistance model in a way, is once you've created this space, once people are in the capital city, it's a bit like, we're here now, you know, we're staying, and other people are attracted to it. And as I've said, you know, and I think a lot of people that experienced those 2 weeks had these conversations where people said, this is the best 2 weeks of my life. You know, I mean, not just one or two. I mean, I must have been hundreds of people saying that. And why is that? You know, this is important to understand why, because, you know, the neoliberal theory of existence is there's costs and they're bad and you avoid them. And then there's benefits like watching telly, you know, which is nice, and you do that. But it's just completely inadequate explanation because it completely contradicts the empirics, right? The observation. So again, this comes back to the observation. You know, there's lots of like left-wing dogmatic sort of viewpoint, which is, you know, conflict with the state is bad and you're going to get hurt and that's bad and you're going to lose your liberty and that's bad. You know, it's a dogmatic assertion. If you look at the observation and the empirics, like, sure, there's plenty of examples where people get hurt and, you know, bitter and, you know, get stressed and what have you. And there's plenty of examples of people becoming more whole, becoming more generous, empathetic, powerful, feeling their own, you know, their own ability to change the world. And, you know, life-changing experiences. As, you know, you can't deny it. You've just got the empirics there. You know, you've got those 300 conversations or whatever it was where people were going, hey, this was the best 2 weeks of my life. And this connects again with this point about climate change, is you've got this big, you know, you've got this massive, massive threat. People feel so powerless about it. And then suddenly you've got this avenue, you know, to actually make a statement, you know, a statement of power. And that's enormously vitalizing, you know, and that's where you get the ecstasy from. It's like, for the first time in my life, I stood up. And not only did I stood up with other people, and I suffered for the cause, and I defended my space, you know. It's the Holy Trinity. You know, that's it. You know, if you want to design like a rebellion or revolution, you want all those elements in there. And then, you know, off you go. Okay, so I want to say something about levels of commitment. So again, if people are watching this and they're thinking, oh, right, this is great, you know, what happened in London? We want to design this. So the idea here is you've got this bulk activity, which is go and occupy public space in a city, you know, and stay there, right? But there's a number of sort of add-ons. So I'm just going to draw this little curve for you. This is like really high-tech stuff. So you've got this like curve. Can you see that? You've got this curve of commitment. You've got loads of people who do a little bit, and then you've got a bunch of people that will do something in the middle. You see the curve going up. And then you've got a few people that will really do high commitment stuff, you know, go on hunger strike or whatever. These people down here will sign an email, you know, blah, blah, blah. So the big sort of like innovation of Extinction Rebellion is they've got like 3,000 people to do this stuff in the middle, which is basically sitting around for a week, okay? But the optimal design is to mobilize all these three sections, as you might say. So what you had is, you know, not particularly in this rebellion particularly, but you've got all these other people that will do things. So you want to have, say, public meetings. We have had public meetings in London sort of during the rebellion or definitely after it. So you get lots of people coming along who will just, you know, help out, and maybe they'll do some phoning or they'll do some leafleting or they'll do a procession in some parts of London. And then you've got this like tail here where there'll be some people who'll do full-on stuff, right? So as probably people know, you had all these people sitting on the road, which was great. And then you had a few hundred people going, you know what, I'll sit on a tube train or something. Now, as everyone knows, like, that was a little bit controversial. And as it happens, we weren't going to do anything that dramatic. But the name of the game here is to get all these three things to happen at the same time. Now, as we've identified, if these people go off too far to an extreme, it's like they'll alienate everyone else, right? But if these people are too sort of finicky about their own stuff, then they'll stop these people doing stuff, if you see what I mean. So the name of the game is to get people to understand there's these three different elements and to be non-judgmental about it. It's like, if you want to do something really full on, then you respect it and you're allowed to do it. The people in the middle are sitting in the road. If people don't want to sit in the road, they're respected as well, because they can do all the other vital things, right? Which is, the admin and doing the leafleting. That's cool. So the idea of like political struggle is you've got these three sections, and the name of the game is to maximize all of them and to synergize them all. So people start off here, and then they move into sitting in the road, and then they move up into, whatever, something sitting on a railway track or something. So that's like the optimal design. Now, often in really dysfunctional movements, these people separate off and they become oppositional, or these people, become, this is what it is. Because people like to think what they're doing is the most important thing. But mature social movements, this is why I'm showing people, is you have a critical mass of people that have this respect orientation, which is, yes, that's important, and that's important. And if you get everyone to work together, then obviously, like, you've got the optimal design. Okay, I want to make another point, right? This might be a little bit controversial, which is, like, a lot of people in Extinction Rebellion during the week, which I don't mean this in a judgmental way, had this slightly immature sort of orientation that if the public support us, then that's good, right? But I'm going to make a sophisticated point here, which is, people tend to juxtapose this, say, everyone's got to support us, otherwise, we shouldn't be doing it, right? And then there's a sort of really extremist point of view, which is, we're right, we're doing it, we don't care about the general public, right? Now, I'm going to suggest both of those are sort of wrong. Like, and the specific thing I want to criticise is this notion that unless most of the general public support us, we shouldn't be doing something. I think that's actually empirically problematic. Because if you look at most social movements, when they set up, most of the public didn't agree with them. Suffragettes, most people thought, no, when they started, or slavery, most people just go, we sort of agree, but, it's not going to happen. Women's vote, women are inferior, that's just the way it is, But what the suffragettes were saying is, I don't care, this is right, this is fundamentally right. So the same with the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, 1961, everyone thinks he's terrible, but what the civil rights movement was going was that actually we're right, and they had that confidence, you can't treat people in a really bad way. Or with the gay rights thing, with AIDS, no one wants to think about AIDS. 70% of people maybe don't want to have to think about it. Who gives a shit, right? It's terrible. So we're still going to occupy the stock exchange. No one wants it. So you can go to the other extreme. If you start blowing buildings up, even if you're right, as we know from the non-violence debate, it doesn't matter if you're right. People are just going to go, no way, right? So the proposition I would say is there's this magic figure in sort of social science of 30%. Like, if you go below 30% support, then you're likely to start losing the whole of the population. But if you stay at 30%, then you're quite likely to slide up to 80%. Because a critical mass of people are going, actually, these people are right. Most people don't like us, but 30% of people agree with us. So we shouldn't be looking at 50%. That's pretty unsophisticated. I think if we're going to be trying to change society in a fundamental way, the figure is 30. As long as we've got 30% support, we should be driving forward. So that's something to think about, in terms of design. And I'm really like critical of the idea that, oh my God, most of the general public won't like this, right? If that was the case, Martin Luther King, suffragettes, they never even got started. You know, you've got to believe. The fact of the matter is we're going to die if climate change happens, right? So, you know, maybe the public's wrong. It is possible for the public to be wrong, you know, in terms of where we're going. Okay, so I want to say a little bit more about this, which is this notion of where the truth is, right? So I think why the suffragettes were successful and Martin Luther King was successful and the gay rights movement was successful was they were making a proposition which was actually right. Now, you can argue about whether it was actually right, you know, in some ultimate sense, or whether it was just intersubjectively right, i.e. like if people properly sat down and thought about it, then they would agree it was right. And so what that means is you should do political action which makes sense if you are right. So if you are right, it makes sense to close down London. Do you see what I mean? But if you're not right, then it doesn't. It's not going to be effective. So this comes back to the sort of anti-postmodernist idea. You know, if it's a postmodernist idea, it doesn't really matter what the issue is. But the fact of the matter, it does. So I'll give you two examples. Like with abortion, right? You know, some people think abortion's terrible. Some people think it's right. Like it's quite a polarized debate. Like no amount of sort of direct action is necessarily going to convert those people because there's profound, like, you know, value differences, right? And a more extreme example is getting people to wear red hats, right? If you want everyone to wear red hats, right, it doesn't matter how many times you close down London. People are going to say, you know what, I'm not going to wear a red hat, okay? I don't care how long you're going to close down London. But with climate change, it's like, it's universal, right? So this comes back to actually analysing the issue. You know, you can't do this on something where low, but with climate change, there's no argument, right? It's universal. We're all going to die unless we get this shit sorted out. So this is where non-violence comes into its own. You know, it's like forceful, and it's going to make this change through disrupting people, because people are disrupted and they think, you know what, my day's been disruptive, but actually I know these people are right, and the disruption actually forces you to make that change. Okay, so I wanted to say something about the end game. Now, a lot of political people just are always obsessed with, you know, what comes at the end, which is sort of fair enough. But the problem is you don't really know, right? Because you've got this complex system. And although that's going to like really annoy them, from a practical design point of view, it doesn't actually matter, you know, because the way to maximize the probability of a great outcome is to say, you know, it requires the same thing, which is go and find that sweet spot, you know, and design a non-violence campaign that will get the opposition into that sweet spot where if they repress, you've won, and if they let you do it, they've won, right? So I'm not going to make big comments about, you know, well, broadly speaking, what we know now is 1,000 arrests, you know, equals the meeting with Michael Gove. You know, that sort of gives you some sort of ballpark. So of course, a lot of people are a bit silly and they say, well, you know, it doesn't work because you only got a meeting with Gove. Well, that's a little bit silly because, you know, obviously if there was 10,000 people in the street, then that might get a meeting with Theresa May. It just stands to reason that the more disruption, the more political power you're going to get. So it doesn't disprove this methodology of change. It just means you haven't done enough of it, right? It's a bit like saying a 3-day labour strike doesn't mean labour strikes don't work. Right? No. Like labour strikes do work, you know, as a general rule, but you have to do them for quite a long time. So that's a little bit of a silly way of looking at it. And then there's this other idea that, oh, we've won, you know, this was fantastic, you know, April the 15th, 1,000 arrests, fantastic, you know, the Labour Party declare climate emergency, you know, Conservatives don't block it, you know, we've won. Well, that's like, from the opposite, you know, that's equally silly in a way as well, because obviously we haven't. You know, there's no way we've won. I mean, it's just like postmodernist sort of posturing, right? It's just like, hey, this is what politicians do all the time. It's like, oh my goodness, I've got, you know, it's terrible, these people are like, you know, hassling me. So you just tend to agree with them and then hope they go away and then just forget about it, right? So oldest routine in the book. So, you know, so the reality is it's somewhere in between the two. But obviously, like, it's been a major success comparatively, because nothing like this has happened before. But, you know, we're on the foothills, if the truth be known. So what we can learn from that is we need to do it with 20,000 people rather than 5. So that would be my prediction. Once you get to 20, you know, you don't need like 100, but 20,000 people, the police are going to be, you know, in the ballpark of going to the government, actually, we don't want to deal with this anymore. You know, you need to have a political resolution. We're not paid to arrest 20,000 people, you know, dum, 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 dum. And if people doubt that will happen, then again, you know, you're empirically on dodgy ground, because it's happened loads of times in recent history. You know, it's the main moment at which, like, radical change happens is when the security forces and the police just go, nope, we're not doing this anymore, you know, we've had enough. So I want to say something else about another issue. So I'm dealing with all the criticisms. So the next issue, I think the Peace News people said this, and, you know, it was like, so where's your demand? You know, there's no point in making these great highfalutin demands, you know, like it's going to lead to disappointment. People are going to get disillusioned, you know, they've got arrested 10 times and then you go and see the government and nothing's happened. It's all fluffy, you know, they've just made statements, you know, where's the concrete result? Okay, so this point of view, again, it's got a lot going for it, right? It's a particular logic. But again, like I said at the beginning, the name of the game in direct action design is to integrate logics. It's not like that one's right and that one's not right. So there's another logic, and I call this like the Occupy logic, right? And again, it's not like, you know, it's not the only thing in town. But the Occupy logic is to have this big sort of statement, you know, inequality is bad, you know, we're being screwed by the 1%. We just want to make this statement. We want to get it out there. We want people to talk about it and discuss it and internalize it and feel emotional about it. And we're just making this big cultural change. And you can see with Occupy, it did have this massive effect. And, you know, there's no question about it. It changed, you know, the global conversation. And at the same time, like, where was the result? You know, where was the intermediate demand? So a solution to this, I would propose, and I'm not saying this is the last word on the matter, is you need to have this. One of the great things about the broad, you know, demand sort of idea is it brings everyone on board. If you have an intermediate demand, everyone starts arguing about what it should be. So that's a downside, right? So we know intermediate demands are good once you've got them, but how do you decide? You know, should it be no third runway at Heathrow, you know, end of fracking? No. So what Extinction Rebellion has done is similar to Occupy, which is it's just said we're over this shit, you know, and we're going to go down to London. We don't really care what we want particularly. We're just like making. I mean, we've got these broad free demands, but it's like the main feeling is just we're just over this. Now, that enables loads of people to come in to the system because they can project their own political egos onto the movement, if you see what I mean. You know, they've got their little thing that we're going to stop fracking, but, you know. So that's good. So I would propose, like, in order to create political power, you have to have this broad demand initially, right, in order to get the mobilisation. But then you should pivot to having intermediate demands. So once you've got enough power, then you can go for an intermediate demand. And then, of course, as the intermediate demand people say, an intermediate demand is fantastic because you've actually got a concrete win. Once you've got a concrete win, you have this thing called demonstration effect, which is everyone goes, oh my God, they've stopped the third runway at Heathrow. Fantastic. And then people come in again. So you can see, like, you know, there's pros and cons. It's not like we're stupid. It's not like we don't know that intermediate demands are really important. It's more like there's just other logics, and arguably that's what we should do. So we could say, you know, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but we could say our next action is we're going to, you know, close down Heathrow for 2 weeks. And we're going to have an intermediate demand, which is no third runway. And arguably that would work because we can get 2,000 or 3,000 people down, and, you know, maybe the government's going to, you know, have some face-saving way where they just go, look, you know, this just isn't going to go ahead. You know, everyone should know, by the way, it's not like they're just going to say on day 2, oh yes, you know, we'll give it you. What happens is they sort of indicate that they're going to give up, and then, you know, 2 months down the line, it just drifts off into the long grass. Okay, next criticism. One of the things that came out of the rebellion was this notion of accountability. So this is quite interesting, and it's one of our big mistakes, right? you know, and not giving ourselves a hard time because, you know, it's difficult to sort of like plan everything, you know, give us a break. But one of the things was, you know, there was this great group of people, you know, loads of working groups, lots of feedback, worked pretty well, you know, it's a little bit tricky, but, you know, functionally, in a real world sense, it worked, you know, and we got this rebellion on the go. And then all these new people came in, you know, like 5,000 new people. And obviously after about 2 days, they're owning it, it's their movement, you know, they want to have a say. Fantastic. But no one quite knows how to organise this. So this was a little bit of a mess, as people know, you know. And again, you know, no one should like be given a hard time about it. It's just difficult, you know, we haven't quite worked this one out. So, you know, the problem is people need to feel like their voice is heard and you know, and then it's how to do that. So I would propose, you know, in the next iteration that we actually pre-plan for this. And I think there's a number of different ways. And again, this is a balancing issue. You know, I'll tell you the two extremes here. So there's one extreme, which is, hey, it's our rebellion. You know, we've got the rapid response team and, you know, we did it and we're in control and we're going to tell you what to do. Well, obviously that's a bit of a no-goer. You know, it's really hierarchical and antisocial and what have you. But then you have the other extreme, which is, hey, we're the people, we're on the ground, you know, we've only just arrived, but it's our movement and we want to have big national assemblies and we're going to spend 5 hours deciding where the toilets are going to go. But at least it's popular democracy, fantastic, you know, maybe we won't get around to an action today because we're so busy talking about where to put the loos, right? You know, I'm caricaturing somewhat, but you can sort of see like, yeah, that's sort of cool, but not really. So what potentially we can do here again is, you know, how do we design the best of both worlds? So there's a few ways here. Yes, we have like a general assembly and then people select, say, 10 people from each site to have a face-to-face meeting with the people who are actually running the show, as you might say. And they come from the people and, you know, they say, you know, the loos are bad and we don't want to do actions there, and you get this feedback. And then people explain, you know, people from the organisation sort of explain their logics. You know, the reason we put the loos there is because of this, and you know, we're going to have this big action tomorrow because we want to avoid that. And then you have a sort of, you know, you have a sort of compromise. You know, we're going to put the loos there, and we're going to have the action early, or what have you. So you get loads of information, and then those people go back to the General Assembly, and as members of that group, as it were, say, yeah, we went to, you know, the central group, as it were, and we put our points of view, and this is why they're doing this, and that's why we won on that, and that's why we agreed with them on that. And everyone starts understanding, you know, why things are the case. Because it's not like people are nasty, it's more people just don't have the full information. Once you've got the full information, you go, oh, right, that sort of works. So it's a matter, the two design elements here are to incorporate people who have just arrived, so they feel like they're part of, you know, the new group. So it's like some of us. And the other thing is this information, you know. So there's a few other sort of ways to do this, but you can see you can maintain both elements. And I think if it happens before, again, then obviously, hopefully these things will get integrated and there can be proper reports, you know, each morning. Another idea is people from the central organisation or whatever you're going to call it, actually, you know, do face-to-face Q&As. You know, every morning someone's there from the central organising system, you're going, you know, why is this happening? Why? Oh, right, it's because of this. Oh, right, okay. And, you know, so these things are never going to be perfect, but you can see how that might be able to work. Okay. So I want to say something about what's next. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. So I'm going to talk broadly here because obviously it's not my remit. I mean, I'm one of the people that coordinates the different ideas, and, you know, I've got a research background, so I've got some ideas about how to take it. But I think, like, I want to introduce, you know, a broader frame than the civil resistance model. Like, civil resistance model is great, but it's not the only show in town. So there's other things that can happen. So another idea is, well, an idea with the civil resistance model is it's got this logic of maximum resources in the smallest amount of time and space. So it's like a military sort of principle, you know, you put all your resources into one thing because then you sort of break through, you actually get to see the Prime Minister. So you can see the logic of that. But there's another logic, which is people go back into their communities. And in those communities, they create, you know, affinity groups, they have conversations, they have meals, they bring people in, you know, they bring the direct action sort of logic into communities, often marginalised communities, who are saying, you know, we've been trying for years to get our voice heard and we haven't, and wow, how did you do it? So there's a massive structural opportunity now to go into these communities and say, you know, we're not pretending we're like you or anything, but we do have this method, you know, and you can use it. And, you know, at the end of the day, this method has been used. It is the method through which oppressed peoples have been getting back at the rich and powerful for 200-300 years. So again, it's not some big patronising, hey, we've got the answer. It's more like we've discovered what you've been doing anyway, if you see what I mean. So this, like, in terms of revolutionary design, as it were, is what you might call a sort of a diffuse strategy and then a concentrated strategy. And the idea is you alternate between the two. So you go to the capital city, you know, you don't quite win, but everyone's amazed by it. You go back to the communities, you build community connection, trust, collective, you know, collective like connection. You know, you do small direct actions, you know, maybe around a climate emergency, getting councils to declare, you know, climate emergency, getting them to go into rebellion with the government, what have you. So you build, this is all movement build. It's not going to bring the system down, but it's like preparation. And then in October, assuming it is going to be October, then everyone does it again. But this time you're doing it with 20,000 people. And then that's because you've got these communities on the go, as you might say. But there's another thing as well, there's another sort of trick in the bag, which is this notion of movement of movements. So often you get a movement like Extinction Rebellion, you go, hey, this is our, you know, it's our game. And that's like a major strategic error. Because with the best will in the world, Extinction Rebellion is not going to cover everyone, right? It's what's called the paradox of political identity. So Extinction Rebellion is successful to the extent that it has a particular identity because it draws people in. But the very fact of having a political identity like limits its growth. So this is why it's paradoxical. Because some people will say, yeah, those Extinction Rebellion people, you know, I'm against climate change, but I don't want to deal with them because they're X, Y, and Z, you know, white and middle class or whatever it is, right? You know, I'm something else. So the creative solution to this is not to sort of go guilt trippy sort of, yo, you should be in our movement, you know. You shouldn't be going, you know, you should be, it's not some Leninist vanguard, you know, it's not like if you're not with us, you're against us, you know, that's all old thinking. The smart move is to say, great, that's your identity, you organise around the climate emergency in your cultural space. So an example might be vegans, for the sake of argument. You know, vegans might say, well, you know, Extinction Rebellion is great, but, you know, they're all eating meat and stuff and, you know, it's not for us. So I'm not going to make a moral judgment on that. I'm just saying, like, for certain people, that's just not acceptable and it's just the way it is, you know. But, like, those vegans could create their own, you know, create their own group, their own culture and say, look, you know, as vegans, we know the system's fucked and we need to, you know, have a rebellion. So then you might have, you know, the next like iteration, you might have the vegan roundabout. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but, you know, just as a naff example, you know. So those guys go there and they do their thing. Now, obviously there's red lines, which has to be non-violent, has to be respectful, you know, has to be like agreed that on the main aims. But the nitty gritty of it, you know, the nuts and bolts, they can be organised in their own space. So you can see how this could go, you know, that you have this alteration, you do the concentrated thing, go back, build the movements, people create special interest groups, you know, doctors against extinction, whatever, you know, vegans against the end of the world, bum, 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 you know, and then everyone comes back in their colourful diversity, as it were, you know, and you know, you've got lots of different groups. And that's what's going to arguably get us to the tipping point. So lastly, I want to say something about other countries, right? So this is another issue around how to design non-violent rebellion in other countries, which is basically like what you're really saying there is countries where the police are more nasty. So you might as well deal with the issue head on. So the first thing to say is, I'm just going to give you some information as a social scientist. I am not suggesting anyone should do anything. People have to make their own decision. If I say, it'd be good to sit down in the street and that might lead to injury or even death, I'm not saying that people should do that. It's not my role, obviously, and it'd be ridiculous for me to suggest anyone should do anything that will put themselves at risk. But my role, as I see it, is to say, if you do this, obviously people may get injured or even die, and it may also win. That's just a fact, right? I'm not putting pressure on anyone. So I just want to make that sort of clear. So I want to say two things about how civil resistance works in countries where arguably or in actuality you've got a more repressive state. So the first thing is this sort of funny thing, I guess, about, it couldn't happen here. So we've talked, I've talked to a number of different countries and people have said, well, Roger, it's great what you're doing in Britain, but it couldn't happen here. So this is similar to the Serbian guys. So there was a Serbian revolution and they got rid of Milosevic in 1990 something. And, it was amazingly successful, non-violent discipline, lots of people in the street, blah, blah, blah. Great. And everyone around the world was going, fantastic, what happened in Syria was amazing. So they set up this little consultancy, and they were going around the world and people, going, hey, mass participation, civil disobedience, this is the optimal design. And people were going, in Burma or Egypt or whatever, they'd be going, that's great, could happen in Serbia, but it couldn't happen here. And what they were saying is, actually, that's not true. Maybe it is, but probably not, because it basically does happen in lots of different places. And the reason why that's true is, and this is a really difficult thing to say, but, it's just the fact of the matter is the backfiring effect, the sort of dilemma action becomes more acute and potentially effective the more repressive the state is. Now, we all know that if the state's repressive, it can repress a rebellion at an early stage, and that's the end of it. So we're not saying repression never works. Obviously it does. A lot of the time the state, is successful. That's why it's really difficult to overthrow repressive states. But, and this comes back to complexity theory, is when the state represses a movement, it shakes the dice. And because it can go either way, and it's very unpredictable. So you can see there's a certain logic, which is you go and, use violence. People don't like the violence and they clear off the street. So there's plenty of evidence for that. But there's plenty of evidence also for the people in the street and they use violence against those people. And then people see that being enacted who belong to that cultural group and they feel solidarity and empathy and rage and what have you. And they come onto the street. So it backfires. So no one's quite worked out what the dynamics are because they're quite complex. But what we can say is it's not immediately obvious that repression works. It's not immediately obvious that repression doesn't work either. So what we do know is if you don't have a rebellion, you're going to get to shake the dice. So again, people have to decide if they want to have a rebellion or not. It's not for me to say. But what is for me to say is if you do choose to have a rebellion and the police repress you, then that's not necessarily a bad thing, in inverted commas, in terms of rebellion success. So that's just an analytical point to be clear about. Now, obviously, a lot of people, watching in other countries might go, well, yeah, that's great, Roger, but we don't want to do it. And I'm going, fine, it's your call. Or they may decide to do it, But let's decide they don't want to do it because, quite rightly, they're scared and, there's no judgment there. So there's another strategy, which is what you might call sort of sweet spot analysis, where you're trying to create a dilemma action. Now, central to nonviolence theory is the notion that there's always a sweet spot. And this sweet spot is where, I'll backtrack a little bit. In nonviolence theory, a central idea is that the oppressor can only oppress to the extent that the oppressed cooperate in that oppression. Now, it's quite a dodgy idea in some ways, but the fundamental point is you always have the option of not cooperating. Now, obviously, that might cost you your life, but that's another issue. The fact of the matter is you can choose not to do something when someone asks them. Unless someone's pinning you to the ground, you can say, I'm not actually going to pick up that stone. Now, the guy might come and shoot you, like, you know, but the fact of the matter is you do, you know, in the last analysis, you have that choice. So in terms of dilemma action design, what you want to do is to do something where the opposition doesn't quite know what to do about it, right? You want to then be in a dilemma. So in a repressed situation, the degree to which you can do something really fluffy is really small, right? You know, you might write a letter to the paper, but even that might be quite scary. And then you have this big area where whatever you do anything in that, and you're going to, you know, end up getting tortured or what have you, you know, really bad. But there is this little slither where you can actually do something. So I give you an example. So in Egypt, right, there's no point, you know, in Britain, if you have a demonstration, that's in the fluffy zone, right? You know, it's not even in the sweet spot zone. It's you know, anyone can do a demonstration. In Egypt, if you have a demonstration, that's in the full-on repression zone. You know, they're going to come, break up the demonstration, drag people off and torture them, right? So it's completely contextual. So you might not want to do a demonstration in Egypt for those reasons. So just before the Tahrir Square situation, the guys were sort of thinking about this. And so they designed a dilemma action. So dilemma action went like this, is they had like 1,000 people or what have you, and everyone wore black. And they stood on the big high street in Alexander, and they were all black, and they just stood there, right? So it was obvious something was happening, because every 5 meters there was someone standing silently in black. So the police came along, and they were in a dilemma, right? Because is this a demonstration or isn't it? Right? I mean, you can see this all the time in the UK, you know. The police arrive, and they're going, you know, is that that's spray chalk? Is that criminal damage? You know, let's stop them from wiping off. No. Let's get them. You know, they don't really know what to do, right? If it was just a demo, they'd know what to do. You know, if you're like hitting people, they'd know what to do. But there's this dilemma area between the two. Yeah. So the name of the game is to have a situation where the police really don't know what to do, and the proposition is even in repressive regimes, people aren't, you know, you can design this. And if you read a book called Blueprint for Revolution, which is written by these Serbian guys, you'll see loads of examples in countries where it's really quite like horrible, but still resistance happens. And as we said, one of the things is once that resistance has started, ironically, the more repressive the state, in some ways, the more likely it can be that you'll get this mass mobilisation because of the backfiring effect. So those are some sort of pointers, you know, to what people can do in other countries. And the last thing to say about other countries is another thing that comes up is, oh, you know, you've got thousands of people in the UK, you know, and we've only got 50, you know, and it's like, fair enough. So what I've been saying to people is obviously you need to get out and talk to normal people and get people, you know, do the science, and people, you know, crying in the meetings and going, oh my God, you know, this is terrible. Then you sign them up to do civil disobedience and what have you. And my feeling is, you know, I could be wrong with this, but my feeling is once you've got to 500 people that are willing to break the law, you know, in the States, let's say, or Canada, then you go for it. Because you want to create this alternation effect, right? So it's not like, hey, you can organise, but you can organise too much and then people trail off because there's nothing happening. Or you can just have, you know, great claim sort of actions and 5 people turn up and they go, well, this is rubbish, and nothing happens, and then they tail off. So between those, again, it's a balancing thing. So the balance is probably like, as soon as you've got 500 people, you should like be blockading the centre of New York, let's say. And obviously it's not, you know, it's not a major, you know, the system isn't going to collapse. But you're going to create a spectacle and you're going to have a demonstration effect. And then in that city, New York or whatever, people are going to come to the meetings because they've seen it. They've seen it on the telly, they've seen it in the local news, seen it on the internet, people have talked about it. Oh, did you see that? It was 300 arrests in downtown, you know, that hasn't happened for 20 years. And then you get like your 4,000 or 5,000 people come in. And then 3 months later, you've absorbed those people and you say, right, we're going to go out now with our 2,000 people. And so that brings you up to April the 15th, London scenario, which is substantial, historic, but it hasn't actually done the job. So then you do the third iteration when you've got the 20,000, and that does the job, whatever that might be. You know, that's where you're going to get Heathrow cancelled, where fracking, you know, you're actually going to get substantial intermediate demands met. You know, and maybe you need like 50,000 to bring in a new political system. But the point here is not to get like dogmatic about organisational action. Do you see what I mean? The balancing, the design challenge is to iterate. You know, we've got organisational phase, action phase, organisational phase, action phase, and then to do that well, you know, to have lots of absorption, as this phrase goes, after the action. You know, you've already got the meetings organised, you've already got the biscuits on the table. You know, the sign-up sheets. Okay. So that's it. I mean, I've run through quite a lot of things, and obviously there's people in Extinction Rebellion, other than me, who've got quite, you know, different take. But, you know, broadly, what I've said to you is how Extinction Rebellion operates in my view. And, you know, there's other things that can be said. So the thing to take from this video is not just to sit there and go, oh, that's interesting, you know, but actually to create this mobilisation process. So there's no excuses. That's my message to people watching this video. You know, Erica Chenoweth said this, you know, who wrote Why Civil Resistance Works. You know, in the 1960s, she said, you know, they had the autobiography of Gandhi and the Bible. Right? They didn't have any social science. Right? Now we've had 30 years of social scientific research on how to change society, right, in a fundamental way. And, you know, I've given you a few tips. I mean, you know, it's not the last word on the matter. But the point is people haven't got an excuse now. There's no excuse for thinking, oh, we're just going to go emailing, you know. There's no excuse for thinking we're going to put hoods on and break some windows and think we're actually doing something constructive. Like, that's gone, right? You know, we need to look at the science. And the science is saying, these are the things that maximise the probability that you'll be successful. No total guarantees, but that's what maximises the probabilities. And so we've got a moral responsibility to actually study this literature and do it better than me and better than Extinction Rebellion, because we're just, you know, we're just making it up. You know, we're just giving it our best stab. And I'm sure some other people will come along and do it better. And the last thing I want to finish on, of course, is the climate catastrophe, you know, which is, it's really easy, and you see this over and over again in movements, you know, and particularly in the climate change movement, is everyone gets obsessed with, you know, how many people are having meetings and whether we're going to do it at that day or that day, you know, just becomes some sort of project. And that's what burns people out, because it's just like, you know, it's just a load of work. And we need to continually remember what we're doing this for, which is for our kids, you know, for the next generation and for the natural world. And that we need to have a service orientation to it. You know, I'm trying my best. I'm giving what I have to this movement to the best of my ability. And, you know, it might not happen. We might go extinct. You know, we don't know. But what we do know is this is our best bet. This is the best way we can do it. And then we can at least die happy, or at least with some self-respect of going, well, you know, we tried the best strategy. We weren't messing around doing something that we actually knew didn't work. And that's what I'd like people to take away from it. And after this video, go and get your piece of paper, write down your ideas, prioritise them, and then get on with the job with other people, of course. And then we might actually win.